Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 139 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Man, 139.
139. You and I were just trying to figure out when 150 was going to hit.
Yeah.
Got to come up with something big for episode 150.
It's a-coming.
As with everything in life, it will be here before you know it.
I know, man.
It seems like, when you were younger, you probably had grandparents that said time speeds up.
Yeah.
As you get older.
Yep.
As you get older, as you and I have gotten older, you start to realize it, man. They were not kidding around.
No, they were serious. Hey, I am constantly looking for a DeLorean.
To go back in time?
Yes. If I can find one at a good price, and you know me, I'm cheap, so that's the problem.
You are very cheap.
They're out there, but I'm not willing to pay that much money for it.
But it's true. It is definitely true that time speeds up the older you get.
To the point, we are now at episode 150 right now.
And it was just like that, blink of an eye.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. So we had some new Patreon supporters. So let's give our shout outs. We had Josh Rolls.
Hey, Josh.
Colleen Allen Steffi.
Oh, Steffi.
Joey Rediger.
What's up, Redica?
Catherine Cornelius.
Ooh, Cornelius. I think when I hear Cornelius, I think of the Planet of the Apes.
That's a good pull.
Yeah.
And you came up with it like, bam.
So fast.
On the spot.
Yeah.
No fumbling, no bumbling.
Don't expect anything else out of me the rest of this
That's
episode.
That's it. You're done. We had Louise Richard.
Hey, Louise.
Carrie McPherson.
She's not afraid of nothing.
Sarah Solomon.
What's up, Sarah?
Sarah Lou Richmond.
Ooh, Sarah Richmond.
Chris Pack.
What's up, Chris?
Alyssa Durkee.
She's no turkey.
E. Whitey.
Hey, E.
David Holm.
What up, home?
Eileen Snyder.
Hey, Eileen.
Mountain Murders.
Really?
Which I'm assuming is a podcast.
Probably is.
Check it out. Annie Cobb.
What up, Annie?
Tyler Rogers.
Hey, Tyler.
Brenda Redenbaugh.
Almost part of the popcorn family.
I was getting ready to say that probably makes you think of popcorn. Jasa Denny.
Hey, Jasa.
Marianne Esparza.
Esparza.
Benjamin Heapsh.
Heapsha.
That's what I'm going with. And last but not least, Michelle Duncan.
What's up, Michelle?
So we appreciate all that new support. And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, we'll go back to, 1985?
The future.
This week we selected Amy Rocamontes.
Hey, Rocamontes.
An unbelievable supporter of the show. She's been with us for a very, very long time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Amy.
We had some PayPal support as well. Chelsea Camp.
Hey, Chelsea.
Heather Allen.
Thank you, Heather.
Mary Ashley.
Hey, Mary.
And Kathy Snyder.
Hey, thank you, Kathy.
So great support all around. We definitely appreciate it. Right now, we have a brand new episode of True Crime All the Time out. It's on Elroy Chester. This was a guy that was primarily a burglar and was busted early in life as a teenager, did a pretty serious stint in prison.
Sure he did.
Got paroled, violated, but when he came out the final time he was still on parole.
Right.
He went right back into his old habit of burglary, but also escalated.
Oh, majorly.
Big time. Yep. Into sexual assaults, murders, really terrorized the area of Port Arthur, Texas for almost a year.
Yeah.
It was brutal. Some real brutal crimes.
It was tough.
But definitely check that out. It's a good episode. Don't forget about our new podcast, The Reviews Are In. Episodes out every Tuesday.
Oh, some funny stuff, man.
Yeah, give you a break from true crime. All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I really am.
We are talking about a case that has a couple of different names. You may see it listed as the Austin Axe Murders. Probably more well known by the name the Servant Girl Annihilator.
Annihilator.
That's a kind of a brutal moniker.
It really is.
And we'll talk about how that came to be. But this case goes back a ways. I mean, we're into the late 1800s. It was really December 30th of 1884 through December 24th of 1885. So for about a year stretch.
Yeah.
In Austin, Texas, 7 women and 1 man were brutally murdered. The victims were all African American, except for two. Two of the women were Caucasian. On top of the murders, the perpetrator also severely injured 8 other people during this time, 2 men and 6 women. You have to say that these 8 people were lucky to escape with their lives.
Well, after all this was said and done, they were like, oh my gosh, are we the luckiest people or what? Couldn't imagine.
Yeah, after everything comes out and you learn, what this person did. So Austin, Texas, pretty well known for its music scene.
Yeah.
A lot of people love Austin.
Been there?
I don't know that I've ever I might have been through there, not really spent much time there, but a lot of people really like the city of Austin, Texas. Pretty major city. I don't know how big it was in the grand scheme of things back in the late 80s, but even then the population was about 15,000 people.
Which is probably a lot back in the late 1800s, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's not New York, it's not anything like that, but we didn't have near as many people in the United States as we do today.
That's true.
So in setting up this story, all of the victims, the ones that died, as well as the ones that survived, were all brutally attacked by someone using an axe while they were sleeping in the comfort of their beds. Scary stuff.
It is scary stuff.
To me, it's scary. Anytime you're asleep, you're vulnerable. To think about somebody coming in while you're in that state, that scares the you-know-what out of me. That's why I have the infrared system on the door.
Oh.
I've got the attack dogs. I've got all that.
I'm so tired of coming in this place and getting strip searched. I don't even know why you have that guy up there. I don't even know how much you pay him, but it's just a little bizarre.
Well, you don't need to know how much. All you need to know is that it's money well spent.
Well,
first of all, to make sure that you don't have anything you shouldn't, but really more importantly, just to see the look on your face.
Yeah, it's the same look every time.
After the strip search is done.
It's the same look I give my proctologist.
It's a bewilderment.
Yeah.
Now, I said that all of these people were attacked in their beds. They weren't all killed. The murder victims were not all killed in their beds. Some of them were dragged from their beds outside, where the killer brutally used this axe on them. Most articles from back in the day, from that time period, said that 5 of the 8 murdered victims were dragged outside. Now, this is one of those cases, Gibbs. I think anytime you're going back as far as we are, some of the information is sketchy at times.
Sure.
We are combing through newspaper articles written in the 1800s.
Right.
So we're relying on information that I'm sure reporting in the 1800s wasn't quite what it is today.
Yeah.
And even today, I don't know in some respects how good it is. I find inconsistencies and errors in newspaper articles written by very reputable papers.
Oh, I know when I've researched, I'll see it happened on this day, and another newspaper will say it happened on that day. It just amazes me that
they get victims' ages incorrect.
Right.
We find a lot of that. But I think the difference is with some of the newer cases, you have much more information. You have so many more outlets, papers, places to try to corroborate information. When you're going back to the 1800s, you don't have near as much to draw from to try to corroborate the facts.
Again, another good reason for you to invest in my time machine. Think of the research I can do if I could go back in time and just observe.
Why do I feel like it would be less like Back to the Future and more like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
No comment.
Okay. The other very interesting thing about this killer is that he, and I'm going to call the killer a he, I'm assuming this is a male killer, he left a calling card with 6 of the 8 victims. And this is not the type of calling card that you're used to hearing about. This calling card was essentially the killer shoving some type of sharp object into the victim's ears. So when you're looking at a series of murders and a bunch of people have sharp objects shoved into their ears, not real hard to connect these to the same person.
Right. Seen a trend.
The killer would also pose the bodies in ways that would immediately tell the police that it was the same person who was killing these people. Not trying to shy away from it, right? Not trying to hide the fact that, because a lot of killers, they want to make it seem random.
Right.
They don't want you to know that the same killer is out killing this person, and this person. The killer we're talking about here was not shying away from it at all.
I don't think this was a shy killer, period. I think he was very bold.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say bold, brazen, let's just go back to the fact that the killer dragged a large number of the victims outside of their house, out into the open. Why would you do that? You have basically some cover while you're inside the house.
It just seems the confidence level that he had to be sky high.
Yeah. Again, I think the point to make is all of these things, they're not things that killers who are trying to get away with things, trying to shy away from letting the police know what they're doing. That's not this killer at all. So we mentioned that an axe was used in the murders. And in the beginning, that's how this series of murders became known as the Austin axe murders. Pretty simple. They occurred in Austin. The murders were carried out by an axe. And then it was around the summertime of 1885 that a different name started showing up, and that was the Servant Girl Annihilator. Now, to me, Gibbs, that speaks more to the killer, the perpetrator, whereas the Austin axe murders is kind of a moniker given to the whole series of murders.
Right.
So the name was given by a local Austin writer who used the pen name O. Henry. He named it that because the majority of the victims were young servants to wealthy homeowners in Austin. So let's dive into the victims in this case. The first murder victim was Molly Smith. Molly was African American. She was murdered on December 30th, 1884. Molly was 25 years old, and she did the cooking for the Walter Hall family. The Hall home was located on Pecan Street.
Did you say pecan?
I said pecan. What do you say? Pecan?
Pecan.
Pecan? Yeah. I mean, there's about 3 or 4 different ways you can say it.
Yeah, I actually hear people say the way you say it is down in the South the more proper way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's one of those words where there's 2 or 3 ways. None of them are technically wrong.
Right.
Unless you're from a specific area and you don't say it that way.
Give you some pecan pie. That's the way I think.
Molly was attacked while she was sleeping. She was also sexually assaulted. And that's something that we're going to see with a number of victims. Not all, but some of these victims were also sexually assaulted. The suspect dragged her unconscious body outside, and that's where the killer took an axe and began to chop at her head, her chest, her arms, abdomen, and legs. This is very brutal. Anytime you're talking about bringing down an axe on a body, Gibbs, you know what type of force someone can bring to bear with an axe. I mean, just imagine, and I think a lot of us have done it, putting a piece of wood up on a stump.
Yeah, chopping wood.
And bringing that axe down to chop that wood. It's a tremendous amount of force. And it does to the human body a tremendous amount of damage.
And one of the articles on this talked about how much blood pooled underneath the body because of how severe this was.
Yeah, you're not talking about one stab. I mean, you are talking about multiple chopping cuts at different points in the body. No doubt, there would be blood everywhere. The killer dragged Molly over by the outhouse toward the back of the property and posed her next to it. Again, with the posing.
And to me, that's where, you talked about him being brazen.
Mm-hmm.
You've killed your victim. Pretty brutal. Probably good time to leave the scene. But no, I'm going to drag the body, mess around a little bit, propping it up against a outhouse. I mean, you're risking getting yourself, either caught or at a minimum, being caught by an eyewitness.
But Molly Smith was not the only person attacked in the Walter home house that night. A man by the name of Walter Spencer was also sleeping in the home, and he was violently attacked in his sleep. Walter had some very serious wounds from the axe attack, but was able to survive, even with these serious injuries. I think for me, Gibbs, and again, we have to say it, we don't have every single fact because none of the articles laid everything out.
Right.
So some of this we'll have to speculate on. But one of the questions that kind of immediately pops up is why render Molly Smith unconscious, bring her outside of the home, commit the attack outside, then go back into the house, attack this Walter Spencer while he's in the bed. Now, you have to believe there's a bunch of other people living in this house.
Yeah, you at least would think the family.
Yeah, the Walter Hall family. This is nighttime, unless they were off somewhere, which I don't think was as common in the 1880s.
Right.
I just didn't understand that part.
Like you said, we could speculate.
That's all we can do.
Right.
At first, I was thinking, okay, the killer brought Molly Smith outside because this axe attack was going to generate a lot of noise. This is not a stealthy way to murder someone.
No, it's definitely not stealthy.
No, not at all.
No.
So if you're doing it inside the house, there's going to be quite a bit of noise. The killer didn't want to risk waking other people in the house up, but then it doesn't make sense because he goes back in and attacks this Walter Spencer inside the house.
And maybe that's what saves Walter Spencer's life, is that the fact that it is too noisy and it starts waking people up. And
it could be. We just don't have all
Right.
the facts around it. But things went quiet for a little while. So, questions are going to come up. Why? Did the killer leave the state? Some people think, maybe he left the country. For whatever reason, we'll discuss some of that later in the episode. But eventually the killer struck again. It was on March 19th, 1885, when two young girls from Sweden, Clara Strand and Christine Martinson, were violently attacked and sexually assaulted in their beds, again, at nighttime. But amazingly, they survived.
yeah, they were a few of the lucky ones.
And I'm thinking about these attacks in my head and just imagining how brutal it is to have this axe come down on you, however many times.
It's got to be scary. I recall when you and I went to that axe throwing event,
Mm-hmm.
and you had me go retrieve the axe out of the little wooden thing down at the end.
Right. The block of wood.
Yeah. And I didn't realize you still had one axe left to throw. And I remember how close it got.
Mm-hmm. It was scary.
It was scary.
And it didn't even touch you. That's how good I was.
But it scared me. It was close.
The fact that these two girls survived. Now, I'm sure they had just horrific injuries. Let's not forget the fact that we're talking about the 1880s.
Yeah.
Do you know how much harder it was to survive injuries in the 1880s?
First, if you could get a doctor that could handle that type of wound, then you had to worry about more so probably the infection.
Yeah, that was probably the big thing. I think a lot of times they just would amputate.
Yeah.
I know that's what they did during the Civil War. The second murder occurred on May 7th, 1885. The victim was a young African-American woman named Eliza Shelley. And Gibbs, I think it's important to point out that she was African American, the first 6 murder victims were.
Yes.
So I'm not going to say it anymore. I'm saying it now. The first 6 murder victims were all African American women. Eliza was a servant cook for a local doctor and his family. She slept in her quarters at Dr. Johnson's home on Cypress Street. That night in the home, she was viciously attacked by somebody wielding an axe. She was also sexually assaulted. And Gibbs, the injuries that she sustained were so severe. The descriptions were brutal. They said that the cuts made by this axe were so deep that many of her body parts were just barely attached, barely hanging on.
Yeah, if she was able to survive, it would be one of those ones that you talked about where they would just have to amputate.
No, I get what you're saying, but I think with these type of injuries, at least the way they were described, there was no way.
Too much loss of blood.
There was no way that she was surviving this attack, and obviously we know she didn't. The third murder happened on May 23rd, 1885. Irene Cross was a young servant who was attacked in her bed on East Linden Street. She was sexually assaulted, but her murder was a little different. She was not killed by blows from an axe. She was actually stabbed to death. Then she was dragged outside into the street and somebody scalped her.
Yeah, actually scalped her, which was definitely different than the previous victims.
Very different.
Yeah.
I mean, sexually assaulted, which we've seen in the previous murders.
Right.
No axe. So we have some type of knife instead, which is then also used to scalp the victim. So what does that mean? The perpetrator is changing his weapon of choice for the first time, or this is not the same killer?
Could be.
Although police believe it is.
Yeah, they definitely do. But no, you're right. It could be some form of copycat, just with a different weapon, or just simply a different murder.
But to believe it's a different murderer, right? Then you have to factor in, okay, this person targeted the exact same type of person.
Right.
A servant working in somebody else's home, an African-American woman, and sexually assaulted her and murdered her in the middle of the night.
And we are talking about a population of 15,000 people. So thinking on a logical side, you would think it'd be difficult to have that many killers, but we know it can happen. You just wouldn't think of it being so common.
Yeah, we know even today there's obviously a lot of killers and have been over the last however many years operating at the same time.
Right.
But in the 1880s, in a town the size of 15,000 people, you've got multiple killers essentially using a very similar MO. Seems a little strange.
I think so too.
It seems more likely to me that this is the same person that, for whatever reason, chose to switch from an axe to a knife for this particular murder. Then things went quiet again a little bit for a few months. It was in early August of 1885 when a servant girl named Clara Dick was brutally attacked, but she survived. Details are a little sketchy. We don't know exactly how she was attacked, what type of wounds she suffered. But the one thing that we do know is that by this time, the locals were scared.
Well, especially if you were a servant, you were really scared.
And the families that were employing these people. Because, yeah, to this point, it was servants who had been killed, but some of them had been killed inside these people's homes.
Yeah.
What was going to stop the person from them going on to another room and killing other members of the family?
Well, just the fact that he was not afraid to come into your house to find that servant. I mean, again, bold, very bold.
Yeah. People began taking additional precautions with everything they did. That became even more important at night. They started finding better ways to secure their homes. Yeah. They were doing everything they had to do.
And why wouldn't you at that point, right? Like you said, you're going to try to do everything you can to protect your family, even the people that work for you. I mean, back in the 1880s, I don't know if the owners of the home valued their servant workers as much as they valued their own family's lives, but I'm sure they still valued them.
Oh, I don't think you would have looked at somebody that worked for you in the same light as your immediate family. But I also think, depending on how long these people had worked in your home, you did really value them.
Yes.
And looked at them as kind of part of the family.
Right.
In some respects. I imagine some of these people did. The problem is this didn't stop the killer, right? There was no amount of precautions, no amount of security measures that was going to stop this person. The fourth murder occurred on August 30th. So within the same month, right, as the last attack, a servant woman named Rebecca Ramey was severely attacked and left for dead in her bed, but she survived. But during this same attack, the killer dragged Rebecca's 11-year-old daughter, Mary, from the house to a nearby warehouse where he sexually assaulted her and killed her. On top of that, he shoved a sharp object in her ear. So again, leaving a signature.
Sure.
So Gibbs, we talked about this up front. This was a calling card, a signature, whatever you want to call it, left by the killer. 6 of the 8 victims were left with something sharp in their ear. The problem is we don't know which 6. We know some of them, and the ones we know we'll talk about. It just wasn't reported which 6 exactly had this done.
Right. But here we see the killer. He doesn't care what age these women, or in this case, girls, are.
This guy's ruthless.
Yeah. I mean, he's willing to sexually assault and kill an 11-year-old.
Yeah, I think that says something about the type of killer that we're talking about. Not that very many killers have scruples or morals, but some do. I mean, there are some killers that will not harm children. There are some rapists that won't sexually assault a child. Does that make them good people? Well, I don't know. But that's not this person. This person doesn't care, is willing to victimize people of any age. I definitely think it says something about the person that is committing these crimes. The 5th and 6th murders occurred on September 28th. Gracie Vance was a servant girl, and she and her boyfriend, Orange Washington, were asleep in a shack in the backyard of the home where she worked. So I don't know if she slept in the house or if she routinely slept in this shack on the property.
Right.
But at least on this night, she was with her boyfriend sleeping in this shack on the property. The killer entered the shack and attacked both of them with an axe. He sexually assaulted Gracie. The local paper, Gibbs, that reported on this attack, they were pretty brutally honest with some of the details.
Oh, they were.
I mean, that's something that you don't even find in cases like in the 50s and 60s. You know, a lot of times they sugarcoated back then the details. It was almost as if they were saying, hey, you, John Q. Public, you're not ready for this. But in the 1880s, they reported that this axe attack on Gracie to her head was so brutal that they likened her head to jelly. So that's an image that's going to be hard to get out of your head.
Pulverized is what comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brutal. Brutal, brutal.
So if people weren't scared before, you read that in the local paper, which was the Austin Statesman, you got to be petrified.
Yeah. And to think that this killer, again, had no problem doing this in a backyard of somebody's property. Ballsy.
Yeah, there's a lot of words, right? You've used bold. I like ballsy. Brazen's another one.
For sure, confident.
Confident. The question is why? Why so confident? Why so willing to commit the murders in the way that he did?
Right.
Why is this guy so confident that he's not going to be caught? And why is he specifically targeting these women who worked as servants for these other families?
Exactly.
Is that a part of why he's so confident? Because he either in some way knows these women or has studied their patterns? I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
So did he think because they were part of a lower socioeconomic class that even if he did get caught, maybe they wouldn't put too much emphasis on what he was doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, this is one of those cases where there's going to be tons of questions and we can speculate. And I actually like the speculation of trying to get inside this person's head, trying to figure out, well, could it have been this? Could it have been that?
I just think for a local at that time, it had to be scary just thinking, this guy has no problem walking into anybody's house with an axe or a knife and doing what he wants to do, to the point dragging them through the house out to the back and finishing them. It's scary.
Well, you used the word local. You're talking about locals being scared. I'll also make the statement that I think it's pretty evident. This person that is doing the killing has to be local as well.
Yeah.
First of all, people weren't as transient back then as they are today. But how was he selecting his victims? How did he know the layout of the house? How did he know which room these women were in? There's something to this and it has something to do with the victims that he's choosing. The fact that they're all servants who worked and lived in another person's house. Was this a person that went around to visit these people's houses because they provided service? I don't know what that service would have been.
Sure.
But while they were in the house, they either saw these women and decided that they were going to become victims. And as part of that, they had at least a layout of the house.
Yeah.
As a part of whatever they were doing. Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
That could be. Now, I don't know what that occupation would have been or what service they might have offered to these families, but there's got to be a connection. And to me, the connection is the victims. And what they did for a living.
Could have been another type of servant, that traveled around different house to house, helping out or had another role. Mm-hmm. Just wasn't daily. Maybe it was weekly or monthly or whatever.
Shortly after the attack on Vance in Washington, two women, Lucinda Body and Patsy Gibson, were seriously wounded after being sexually assaulted while they were asleep, but they both survived. So we've talked about it a little bit, but the shock that had to have been traveling through this community, Gibbs, the rage that there's a killer on the loose, hasn't been caught or identified yet, that had to be pretty high.
Yeah.
And then you talk about the African American community, especially. It's members of their race that are being killed.
Yeah. Why are they being isolated?
They have to be even more worried.
If you are an African American servant, you're not sleeping good at night.
No, you got to be scared out of your wits. But things are about ready to change. And that change happens on Christmas Eve, 1985. This is when the 7th and 8th murders occurred. These are the last two murders. Sue Hancock, who happened to be Caucasian and also happened to be one of the wealthier women in town, was sexually assaulted and dragged from her bed to her backyard. Gibbs, her head was chopped in two, and a sharp, thin object was pushed into her ear, and it penetrated her brain. This happened around 11:30 p.m., and it was her husband who ultimately found her.
Now, in this case, the killer did not touch her 16-year-old daughter, who happened to be sleeping right next to her at the time.
In the same bed.
In the same bed. Mm-hmm.
And then it was close to midnight that 17-year-old Eula Phillips, who was also Caucasian, was said to have been pretty wealthy, was sexually assaulted while she was asleep in her bed. She was dragged into her in-laws' backyard and murdered. Gibbs, this is about 30 minutes later.
Yeah, this guy didn't waste any time. I mean, clearly he was in the upper scale neighborhood, I guess to say.
Yeah, he went from one upscale home to another, but to commit two vicious murders in the span of about 30 minutes. Eula's husband, Jimmy, was also attacked, but he survived. Eula was found the next morning. It's Christmas morning by her in-laws. It was noted that her face was smashed in.
Yeah.
From this axe. She was lying on her back, and the killer had driven wooden stakes into each of her arms, essentially pinning her to the ground. This is some movie type stuff, like horror movie stuff here.
And that was something different, right? We haven't seen that from this killer where he's actually done something like that. But just the thought of that, not knowing what stage she was at when he did that, to be alive, to have that happen to you before your face was literally smashed in by an axe.
So, on the one hand, you could say there's some differences between these two murders and the others. First, these two women are Caucasian. You have these wooden stakes, which is strange compared to some of the other attacks. But then there are many similarities.
Yeah.
The fact that both of these women were dragged from their beds, the fact that an axe was used, one of the women had, an object pushed into her ear. It's pretty hard to say that's not related.
Exactly. Now, with her face being smashed, some of the town people thought she was known to be the most beautiful woman in that town. And so was her face smashed as part of trying to make a statement?
Yeah, I think of all the attacks, this last one, the murder of Eula, you could look at as being a little different than the others. But the fact that it happened in pretty much the same neighborhood, I believe, as the one right before it, 30 minutes later, are you telling me there's two crazed killers that are operating in the same neighborhood 30 minutes apart?
Yeah.
Kind of tough to believe.
Now, the police at first will look at them differently.
And I can see why they would.
They're going to look at the husbands. They're going to try to say maybe the husbands were doing some copycat killing. This is a time to get rid of their wives, blame it on this serial killer, right? And one of the husbands was arrested and charged and sent to prison. That was Jimmy Phillips. But later he was acquitted. And I think the police finally realized there was no way that two men would commit a copycat killing within 30, 60 minutes of each other.
Separately. Yeah. That's kind of tough to believe unless they got together and said, okay, you kill your wife at 11:30.
Right.
I'll do something similar around midnight. And the police will believe it was this killer.
And we'll finally be free of our wives.
But this was the last of the assaults and killing. But the town, the community, the police, they didn't know it, right? At the time, they're still on edge. So police put additional officers out on patrol. Citizens also formed their own patrols.
Yeah, kind of like a Citizens on Patrol.
Yeah, kind of just like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the movie.
But the killings had stopped. So you have to ask the question, why? Was this person killed? Were they caught for something else and put away? Did they move either to another part of the country, maybe outside of the country? Did they go overseas? Or did they just decide, you know what? I don't want to kill anymore.
Yeah.
The problem is, and I think this bears out, most killers who kill in the way this person did, right? Multiple times. You would label this person a serial killer today. They don't stop on their own. We know that. I'm not saying there's not exceptions, but for the most part, these type of killers don't stop. They're doing it for a reason. They're getting something out of it.
Right.
They don't all of a sudden just decide, I don't need that. Whatever it is I'm getting, I don't need that anymore.
They either relocate and start it up again, or they're sitting in a prison, or like you said, they're buried in the ground.
There's a reason why they can't do it. Yeah. Now, over this year when the killings occurred, there were some witnesses that came forward. They said that the killer was short. Some people said the killer was tall. Some people said he was Caucasian. Some said African American. Some even said he was Asian.
And they're all over the place.
They're all over the map.
The police are like, I don't know what we're looking for here.
Some witnesses said that this person was very well dressed. Others said that he looked like he was homeless.
So we're looking for a well-dressed, sometimes bum.
Who's short, tall.
Yeah.
Caucasian / African American / Asian.
Should be easy to find.
We should be able to find that person. 2 days after the last killings, the paper said the killer was insane on killing women. They also described this person as a very cunning man. There really was very little physical evidence in these murders. Now, it's the 1880s.
Right.
There's not like a CSI team combing these murder scenes. There was one possible footprint that seemed to show that the suspect was missing a little toe, one of his little toes. Now, that could be true, or it could be for whatever reason that part of the impression was not made. Maybe his little toe had a deformity and it stuck up high in the air,
like yours,
and like mine, and never made actual contact with the ground.
Or it could have been made by somebody that was made earlier in that day, unrelated to the crime.
That happened to be missing a little toe?
Yeah.
Maybe. After the first two murders, now we're really talking more about the investigation. The police brought in bloodhounds in an attempt to track the killer down, but police said that the bloodhounds were unsuccessful. They believe that the killer knew how to cover up his tracks.
Yeah. Well, he was cunning, according to the paper.
According to them. Now, if you're the police, what else are you going to say? You have a whole community that is wondering why you can't figure out who's killing all these people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say we haven't figured it out yet because this guy's extremely cunning and he knows how to cover his tracks.
I mean, in 1 year, you have 16 people attacked, 8 of them dead. It's not good.
No.
It's not good for public relations.
Can you imagine in the town that I live in? I don't live in a big town, but I'm sure we have more than 15,000 people in the town. Can you imagine if there were 16 attacks and 8 murders in a year? It would be bedlam in this town.
I wouldn't want to drive through here. I'd be worried that someone's going to mistaken me for something I'm not.
There would be people sitting on their porches with shotguns.
Yeah.
There'd be people that would have shotguns rigged to the door. You know, like in the movie where you open the door and the shotgun goes off.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be a pizza delivery guy.
No, it would be, people would be so on edge. I'm afraid that there'd be a whole bunch of accidental shootings because everybody would just assume that everybody else is a killer.
Be like, oh, I was just the DoorDash guy.
Well,
oops.
You rang that doorbell too loud.
He's right.
Scared the you-know-what out of me. The police did interview over 400 people, which is a lot in a town of 15,000, I guess.
It's a pretty big population size.
Yeah, if you look at it that way. But they never really found any good leads. They interviewed, the boyfriends, the husbands, the homeowners. That's to be expected.
Sure.
But there were some possible suspects that we need to talk about. The first is a 19-year-old African-American cook named Nathan Elgin. And I think maybe Gibbs, this gets into the area of some of the things we were theorizing.
Yeah. Knowing the neighborhood, the people,
the families.
The layouts.
Yeah, because Nathan was familiar with the area. He worked in the area as a cook. He was there during that time period where the crimes took place. he also was missing a little toe,
Yeah.
which is not fortuitous for him when it comes to being a suspect, when the only known footprint is missing a little toe.
But also, like I said, if he happened to be working at that property anytime recently,
He could have made the footprint
Yeah.
and not been the killer. Yeah, I get that. Still doesn't look good to a police department that is desperately trying to solve this case.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the guy with the missing little toe.
right. More for me, what makes him a possibility is the fact, as you said earlier, that he knows the area.
Yeah.
He knows the in and outs of these homes.
And as a cook, he was probably in and out of, some of these homes, cooking for different people. But police were never able to prove anything as it relates to Nathan Elgin, because he was shot and killed by the police while he was attempting to assault a girl. Apparently, he had a knife to her throat, and the police shot and killed him.
So that sounds...
Doesn't make you look good. You got the missing little toe problem, and you're caught in the act of trying to attack a girl with a knife.
Now, could it have been that police were desperate and trying to bring relief to this community?
Oh, it could be.
And that this was a setup?
You never know. There are a lot of people that say, okay, this killing of Nathan Elgin happened in February of 1886. And so that's why there were no more murders, because he was dead. You got to look at this guy as a pretty viable suspect
I think so. He also would make a really good out.
for the police.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is it's really hard to question a suspect after you've already shot and killed them.
Yes.
They don't give up a lot of information.
They're pretty tight-lipped.
Yeah. Another suspect was a Malaysian cook named Maurice, who worked at the Pearl House Hotel in Austin. Police said that Maurice's job location gave him access to all the homes where the victims were killed, because he was essentially in walking distance from all of these places from his work. Now, in Austin, Texas in the 1880s, were you really that far outside of walking distance from a lot of places?
Probably not.
I don't know. I don't know how big geographically Austin, Texas was in the 1880s.
But it definitely lends to your theory that whoever committed these had to know the layout of the homes. And
I still believe that. I believe whoever the killer was had some inside type of knowledge about these houses. Had to have. And there's no way that these victims were selected randomly. There's just no way that a person happened to randomly pick this many women that were working as servants. It's just not going to happen.
at some point, this person had to come in contact with these individuals
and make the conscious decision that they were going to be his next victim.
Right.
Yeah. I truly believe that part. But getting back to Maurice, he left the area in early January 1886. So there again, there are people that believe that's why the murders, the crime stopped, because he moved away. He moved to New Orleans for a few months and then on to London. It's kind of a big move. Now, there are also people that feel, okay, once he got to London, he began to kill again as a man that many people know as Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. There's definitely some theories behind that.
And there are people that put credence behind that because for the fact that it's been said that when Maurice left London, the Jack the Ripper murders stopped. So
Coincidence?
maybe, maybe not.
Right.
It's interesting though, right?
Yeah. It's weird how you can fit things to make it work the way maybe you think it should.
Well, that's true with everything, right? Now, there's some things that just don't fit.
Right.
But if there's even a hint that things fit, you'll figure out a way to make them
Right.
fit enough that people believe, okay, it's possible.
Enough for you to go,
Another suspect is a merchant from Liverpool, England by the name of James Maybrick. He was known to be in the city of Austin when these murders took place. He's also a guy that some people believe could be Jack the Ripper.
So a lot of tie-ins.
There is.
Yeah.
But he died in May of 1989, and there were no killings, obviously, in Austin after that, but there were no Jack the Ripper murders after that as well. So, again, that's why some people believe that it's possible he could be both of these killers.
It could have been.
His wife also poisoned them. So,
Well,
you got that. Maybe she's Jack the Ripper, too.
maybe she is.
One other suspect, Gibbs, to talk about was a man named Buck Taylor. And Buck Taylor performed in the famous Buffalo Bills Wild West Roadshow.
Yeah. Pretty popular show.
Very famous. He lived about an hour from Austin. So people believe that it's possible,
Right.
given his proximity to the city, that he could have been the axe murderer. But they also tie him to Jack the Ripper as well, because the Wild West show went to London
Yeah.
during the Jack the Ripper timeline. So Buck was there.
So I think if you were in Austin at the time of those murders and happened to be in London at the time of Jack the Ripper murders, you are automatically a suspect
In both.
in both.
Yeah. So the first couple we talked about, especially the very first guy, Nathan Elgin, he really has some ties
Yeah.
or possible ties to the Austin murders. When you look at some of the other suspects, and maybe the second person, Maurice, you can make some, but some of these people, like you said, they just happen to be in Austin or near Austin during the time of these killings. They also happen to be in London during the time that the Whitechapel murders were taking place.
Right.
So I think just for that very reason, they became suspects, but there's no real tie for some of these people to either one, other than the fact that they were known to be in the area.
Yeah. I mean, a strong possibility these were just two individuals, unrelated. I mean, we're talking about it, but it's what makes people think that it has to be the same person in Austin that did it in London, you know?
Because it's sexier, right? To think that somebody was committing murders in Austin.
Yeah.
They up and stopped. They moved to London and became Jack the Ripper.
Certainly intriguing.
Yeah. But again, there's really no ties. And the only tenuous tie-in would be the guy that is missing a toe.
Yeah.
And even that is, in the realm of physical evidence, it's not much at all. But we talked about the city of Austin in the beginning. This was an up and coming city. In the late 1800s, it would go on to become a fairly large city. And like I mentioned, a community that a lot of people really like.
Oh, yeah.
The leaders in Austin, they were very upset that authorities were never able to make an arrest in these murders. They wanted the city to be known as a safe place, right?
Well, sure.
What city leader wants their community to be thought of as the place where people just get dragged out of their beds and murdered by an axe? No one.
That's not something you want to be in the press for.
There were a lot of theories, and the theories varied wildly between groups of different ethnicities. So you had the African American community, where many residents felt very strongly that the murderer was a white male who only killed two white women towards the end to throw police off his trail.
Yeah. They thought maybe that he would be found out soon. So by doing that, it would make them go in a different direction.
There were other people that thought the killings had something to do with some type of black magic, or people that were performing black magic.
Right. It's a stretch.
Yeah, again, a lot of these things are a stretch. They don't really make sense because there's no explanation as to why people thought that.
Right.
It's just written in the paper that way.
I mean, when you have something that goes so long unsolved, I think exactly what you said. People are just trying to stick anything out there and see, does it make sense? Can we make it make sense?
Sure. So we've already talked about the connection between the axe murders in Houston and Jack the Ripper. After the Jack the Ripper murders made the headlines, that's when some of this stuff really started to percolate in people's mind. And it still does today. There are online crime sleuths, or whatever you want to call it, people that think, yeah, these two people could possibly be the same individuals.
Yeah, I think in any situation like this where it's unsolved, you could try to weave about anything.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you do have some similarities in the murders. There was the brutality.
Sure.
Both killers were very brutal, axes, knives, the body mutilation. Some of the eyewitnesses in both cases said that the killer was a little dark complected.
Right.
Some people have theorized that the killer was a sailor, which they used to explain the gaps in the killings. So this person's out at sea, either fishing or doing whatever they're doing.
Okay.
And they use that to explain, okay, this is why he's in Austin. This is why he's now in London. Because that's the part that I struggle with. In the 1880s, how many people are traveling from Austin, Texas to London?
Yeah, I think it would be a very small population.
I've never even been to London.
Yeah, to get from Austin to London back then had to be expensive.
And take a very long time.
Or you were down at the very bottom of the boat, was it steerage?
Mm-hmm.
And you hope that you made it there alive.
With DiCaprio.
With DiCaprio. Yes. Top of the world.
There were some eyewitnesses accounts that have said Jack the Ripper was dressed like a sailor. Again, I don't know if any of this is true. I mean, eyewitnesses have said a bunch of different things about both of these killers.
Yeah. We have eyewitnesses putting me places, and
yeah.
We know that
that happens all the time.
Probably was true, but maybe not.
So we talked about eyewitness accounts. It seems like the complexion of the killer varied wildly.
Yeah.
But not as much with the height and weight. Most of the accounts had this person as a shorter, broad-shouldered, stocky man. Most people said around, 5'6", 5'8".
Is that like your favorite actor?
That's Tom Cruise range. That's Tom Cruise standing on like 3 phone books.
That's the taller version. I gotcha.
That's the stand-in for Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
So neither of these murders have been solved. We know that. And, thinking about how old this case is, our case is, as well as the Jack the Ripper case.
Right.
It's unlikely they ever will be. I mean, especially with the Jack the Ripper case, it's much more well known. There are tons of people that say they've solved it, and they say it's this person.
Right.
There have been whole books written about the fact that, yep, it's definitely this person, and here's why, and I've laid out all the facts. I think, each case is fascinating on its own, right, as a standalone case, but then you put the two together, and that ups the level of intrigue a little bit, thinking that, okay, could these two cases be connected? The possibilities that they're somehow tied to each other makes it more intriguing.
Sure. And it's not the only case that we've heard something like this about. Zodiac.
Yeah.
How many times have you heard?
Zodiac has been linked to umpteen unsolved cases. I mean, what was that case we did back in the day? The Phantom.
Yeah.
Texarkana.
Yeah.
People said that was Zodiac. And
it's just easy when you don't have the answers, when you don't know. If it was in the same time frame, similarities are enough to convince somebody. Mm-hmm. It's easy just to throw the name out.
Well, I think today it's happening with Joseph J. D'Angelo, man thought to be the East Area rapist, Golden State Killer. Basically, if you go back to the time frame that he was thought to have been operating, and you look at any unsolved case,
right,
where the MO is even remotely similar, they're looking at this guy.
Sure.
If they have any evidence that they can pull DNA from, they're going to run it against him.
Yeah, they're going to try to see if they can get a hit.
Yeah, why wouldn't they? I mean, this guy was extremely prolific. There's no reason not to check him out in some of these long, cold, unsolved cases,
Absolutely.
Especially where the MO is very similar. I think the one thing that you can definitely say about both of those cases, right? The axe murders in Austin, as well as Jack the Ripper, very tragic, left major scars on these communities. Now, London was a lot larger,
Sure.
obviously, but we talked about this writer who went by the pen name O. Henry. He's the guy that kind of came up with this moniker, the Servant Girl Annihilator. Well, his real name was William Sidney Porter. He later wrote that these murders made a dull town. He was calling Austin a dull town, I guess.
Right.
Very lively in the late hours. He wrote, quote, "Town is fearfully dull, except for the frequent raids of the Servant Girl Annihilator, who make things lively in the dull hours of the night." To me, it's almost kind of strange what he's saying, that these murders livened things up. It's not a phrase, I guess, that I would use when it comes to such horrific murders.
No, it's almost like you're in favor.
It's almost like he's saying it made things better, more interesting. It's kind of strange to me.
Almost like he's looking forward to it.
So this name that he came up with, the Servant Girls Annihilator, it was pretty popular with the local papers and some of the surrounding papers. But when it came to national and international papers, they still use the Austin axe murders, which I believe is a much better name for this series of crimes.
Yeah, I do too. It just seems to fit it.
The other one just sounds strange to me. So that's it, Gibbs. That's it for the case of the Austin axe murders. I kind of went back and forth about what I want to call it, but now I've decided. I'm sticking with the Austin axe murders.
I prefer that.
The other one just, I can't get behind.
Sorry, O. Henry.
Still unsolved, right? After 100 plus years. And, you know, you and I talk about cases that are 20 years old, 25, 30 years old, and the likelihood that it will ever be solved. It goes down.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about a case that's 100 plus years old. There can't even be a deathbed confession because everybody involved that would have been involved or knew about it, they're already dead.
The only way we're going to solve this is if you donate to my time machine. I'm telling you, it's a good investment. Just write me a check. You will get a return on your money.
We would have the most amazing podcast in the history of podcasts if you had a real time machine.
Well, we go back and we would be the very first podcast ever.
No, I was thinking more like you will take the equipment with us.
That's even
we'll
better.
Interview
these
suspects from like 60 years ago.
You don't know it yet, but you're going to die tomorrow.
Can we get an interview?
Yes, please.
All right, buddy. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Yes, hear them.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Courtney from Nashville. I just wanted to say that I love you guys' show. I work outdoors, and instead of listening to music, I listen to your podcast. I also listen to Unsolved as well. And I've actually gone through the podcast. Well, let's just say this is my third time re-listening to everything. You guys are awesome, and you guys always cheer me up because I love the humor. Also, I'm also a little I feel like I'm getting, how do you say, paranoid. My boyfriend thinks, me listening to all this stuff is a little weird. But I can't help it. I find it intriguing. And, well, I just wanted to say thank you. And you guys are awesome and keep your own time too.
So appreciate that voicemail. What I will say about that is I think a little paranoia is okay. Now, it depends on your definition of paranoia.
Sure.
But, I'm kind of lumping it in with keeping your head on a swivel, being vigilant. That type of paranoia, I think, is good.
Get one of the safety whistles.
Well, you definitely need a TCAT whistle if you don't have one.
Right. But go back and re-listen for the fourth time.
Yeah. You can never re-listen too much.
Hey, I'm Karen from Orange County, California. Found your podcast about a month ago. Already ripped through of all of the true crime all the time. Moved on now to Unsolved. I think I'm 25 hours in. Not only do I fall asleep to your podcast, but I listen to it all night long, keep my AirPods in. Your voices are going through my head until I wake up in the morning. So glad that you guys have this thing. It has kind of changed my life. Keep your time ticking. Love you guys. Bye.
Wow, Gibbs, did she say we changed her life?
It's the subliminal messages that I leave that people don't realize. And when they do that and they fall asleep, then I give them, you are going to be a better person tomorrow.
So that's why when Gibby's not talking in an episode, that's why.
I'm there. But you can't hear it unless you're sleeping.
He has a separate microphone that he's putting subliminal messages in.
That's right. Team Gibby.
Do you remember when subliminal messaging on TV used to be this thing that everybody worried about?
I know. They really were.
And actually, I think there was some, right? People were putting in these little blips. You couldn't see them.
Really fast. It came through.
Yeah, I don't think you could see them with the naked eye, but your brain would pick it up or something.
And then you want to go out and get a Big Mac right away.
I remember people talking about that as like some bad thing that was going to hit us with all this subliminal messaging. Maybe that's why we turned out the way we did.
TCAT.
That's not subliminal.
Oh.
You're talking into the microphone. I'll explain what subliminal is after the episode.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, it's Megan from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller. I was just listening to the Unsolved episode about Nikki Forrest and Caitlin Markham, and you mentioned Ellie Weiss, I believe her name was. Just a quick story. I heard about this a couple months ago because I work with somebody who was friends with her, and she knew all about it, and she told me about it, and I got full body chills, as the crime junkies say, when you mentioned her name. I've never had like a connection like that before, and it's really scary when she told me that happened basically right next to our work. Anyway, I love your podcast, and keep your own time ticking. Bye.
We keep hearing, Gibbs, from people that have these just strange connections, right? Whether they know somebody, they've talked to somebody, and then all of a sudden, boom, we do the episode and it kind of jars memories or, things like that. It's interesting to hear about it.
It really is.
Hi, this is Angela Wheelahan from St. Louis, Missouri, and I nearly peed my pants when I just heard Fergie announce my name, because then Gibby went to Bobby Callahan, brakes and tires. Oh my gosh, that was so hilarious. First of all, Fergie, you said my name correctly, which no one ever does. And B, I think it's hilarious that you thought of Tommy Boy. It's one of my favorite movies. Anyway, I love your podcast. I started listening to it in 2017. I'm a long distance runner, and it gets me through a lot of my runs. I'm ruined on other true crime podcasts because no one has the banter of you two, and I'm disgusted and irritated by them. So I only listen to True Crime All the Time, True Crime All the Time Unsolved, Criminology. I love you guys. I think you're great. Keep up with what you're doing and keep your own time ticking. Bye.
Wow. Awesome.
It is.
Now, what people don't know is that as a Patreon member, we dive deep into your background. So we already knew that her favorite movie was Tommy Boy. Didn't change you from getting the character's name wrong, but that's beside the point.
It happens.
It happens.
It happens.
But there's a dossier that's built when you sign up for Patreon.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding about that. I don't want anybody to think we're doing deep dive backgrounds. That'll freak people out.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. We got to get out of here. So that is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So from Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.